Hello and welcome to the Elder Tree podcast. My name is Twiggy Dawn. I'm the founder of the Elder Tree and Alchemilla Herbals, and I reside on Jitterbug land here in Far North Queensland. You are listening to the Herbal Education segment, where each new moon I invite a myriad of plant wisdom keepers to chat about the world of herbal education, about their passions and motivations, and their dreams for the future of herbal medicine education in Australia. This podcast is brought to you by the Elder Tree, a non-for-profit organisation whose mission is putting the medicine in the hands of the people. One of the ways that we are doing this is through this podcast. If you would like to go deeper with the podcast journey while supporting the Elder Tree for as little as $2 per week, then you can become a member of our Patreon. Thanks to all of the people and plants who have helped to make this podcast possible. In today's episode, I interview Sarah Smits from Bridging Worlds Midwifery, who is an inspirational midwife and teacher working globally with birth workers and birthing families. She is weaving traditional ways back into the birth space in Australia, and she is passionate about assisting mothers and babies to have optimal health and looking at pregnancy and birth in a holistic way. She is also my housemate, and we recorded this interview in our lounge room on Jitterbug land by the fireplace on the first sunny day that we have had, I think, all year, and it is the 1st of June. In this interview, we discuss traditional midwifery practices, preventative healthcare, and the historical context of Western midwifery. Sarah explores the use of herbs and plants in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum care, as well as the importance of addressing birth trauma and providing postpartum support. Sarah opens up about traditional practices from Mexico and Guatemala, and especially practices that aid in recovery from birth. We talk about the power of intentional nutrition, herbal plant baths, yoni steaming, and bodywork techniques such as the Temazcal steam lodge and closing the bone ceremonies. This episode provides a holistic perspective on pregnancy and postpartum care, blending emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects to ensure long-term health and well-being for mothers and babies. Join us for an enlightening discussion that is sure to offer valuable insights and practical advice for anyone interested in traditional midwifery, herbal medicine, and holistic support during pregnancy and postpartum. Good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Elder Tree podcast today.
Morning, Twiggy. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's so good to have you here. I'm really excited about this interview with you as a home birth midwife that's doing really incredible things in Australia and around the world. And so, because we live together, we get to have all kinds of juicy topics and juicy conversations. So I know where we're going to go. But just to start with, I would love to, for the listeners to hear about some of the projects that you're currently working on at the moment.
Cool. So I'm a home birth midwife. So that is one arm of my business and what I do. So I support women up in Far North Queensland who are choosing to birth at home, or provide them complementary care if they're choosing to birth in the hospital. And I also teach. So I travel the country and teach other birth workers mostly, or anyone who works with birth really, about traditional midwifery practices that I've learned on my travels around the world. And my focus is mostly on postpartum care, where my passion really lies, sort of like preventative support measures during pregnancy to ensure that women are birthing in a way that they are at optimal health for them and their baby, to therefore support the likelihood that they're going to have a straightforward, normal birth, and then that flows onto their postpartum. And I also teach belly binding and traditional postpartum ceremony.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's some real missing pieces there with the traditional midwifery practices being taught, because it's probably not really so much what's being taught in the modern Western model in the university world. And it's really incredible the work that you're doing, and especially keeping that tradition alive and working on the preventative healthcare piece as well, because that's something that, again, is not so much talked about. There's like a preparation for birth, and then there's the birth, but I don't know how much, at least when I was going through the midwifery system, I wasn't really taught how to prevent situations from happening and how to like promote my overall health. So Yeah.
Yeah, it just comes from like our midwifery history of being so reliant on the medical system that a lot of that knowledge has been lost. So there are traditional cultures and traditional midwives around the world who that's still how they practice out of necessity. If you don't have access to those like medical supports, or if you're choosing that you don't want to go down that route, then we need to be more like self-resourceful. So that's just has been a main driver for me. I wanted to be really resourceful and really interested in learning about these traditional practices. And because of the way the world is going, like we're now at we've passed a tipping point with the medicalization of birth that it's actually causing more harm than being supportive. So now we're trying to really rein it back. So there are still traditional practices and traditional midwives around the world, so we need to reconnect with that knowledge in order to find that balance, because medicine is needed at times, but not always. It's quite overused in our society, but particularly in birth, which is a normal physiological process. So to be able to find that balance of that, the traditional and the modern, is something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so could you give us like a little bit of a historical context then? Like I know you're working in Guatemala, but with our kind of lineage of the European side of things, the Western side, could you give a little bit of a overview of like where you think how we've gotten to where we are now and what the roots of traditional midwifery are in our culture?
So throughout history, women have always been cared for by women at birthing at home. So it was the elders in your community, the women who have been around births, and traditional midwives. And where there were circumstances that birth was becoming challenging or looking like it wasn't going to progress normally, we've always had our skills and knowledge working with plants, working with massage, working with the body to support a labor when it wasn't progressing normally. But there were circumstances where in European history that I've looked up anyway, that the midwives would then ask the doctors to attend at home in a complicated birth scenario. So that is something that just sort of became, more and more occurring. So when doctors utilize things like forceps, they were only allowed to be used by men. So when universities came in and men were studying medicine at university, the women weren't allowed to attend university. So it became this two segregated arms of maternity care, of obstetrics and midwifery, and then that hierarchy that also occurs in other areas as well, that if you've gone to university and if you've studied medicine, then you know more than someone who has not studied in that way, and it really discounts the knowledge and the wisdom of the midwives and that they've always carried. So birth just naturally over time started to move more and more out of hospitals because of that societal viewpoint that medicine is superior. And there was another turning point during the war that they're wanting to find a safe space for women to birth. So they were taking women away from their homes and saying, birth in this safe place, which is the hospital. And then it kind of just never moved out. So yeah, we're going through a real like reclamation at the moment of like a rise of home birth and reclaiming that midwifery knowledge. Even in Australia, midwifery isn't really seen as an autonomous practice. It's seen as something that was alongside medicine, and that's very much the culture in the hospital system. But it's starting to change, which is exciting.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for giving that historical context. And it just rings very similar to the herbal medicine movement as well, and herbal medicine education, and how far we've come from grassroots and the folk medicine, and the medicine being with the people, and the traditional medicine. And then, with the advent of universities and certain circumstances like war and certain disruptions, we've come to be kind of reliant on a different system, and disregarding and seeing like the old systems as woo-woo or untrustworthy, or out there alternative kind of things, where actually they were never alternative. They were the systems that we all relied on that worked. And so yeah, it's really beautiful to feel that there's a change coming. That things are changing.
Yeah, and I feel like with universities, they can be they're obviously really great as well. Like we've made incredible advancements, but it's really tunnel visioned our way of accepting how we can learn. Like it's like, okay, you have to have a degree. We're very like degree and certification focused in the Western world, and we discount other ways of learning. And like particularly working with women and birth and working with herbs, it wasn't just like trial and error and just see what happens. It was a very sort of like connected way of learning. It's a strong lineage, and it was very learning from your elders, which is what I see is a real problem in ways of learning midwifery today. So we're going to university, we're learning in a textbook, and birth doesn't fit within a textbook. Any sort of alternative, seen as alternative birth practices, they're not taught. They're in regards to like at universities and things like this, that has always been wisdom that's come from women and that other midwives have held. So that apprenticeship style of learning and mentored style of learning like is so valuable. And that's a way that I try and bring back my teaching and sharing now of like, okay, we have so much to learn from each other. There's so many different combinations of how birth and pregnancy can unfold. You can't know it all. So having a more community style learning and learning from each other and learning through storytelling is so valuable.
And listening to our elders as well. Yeah, definitely. There's there's so much truth in that. Like the university system is beautiful if the two worlds can work side by side, if science and tradition and the deeper arts can kind of work together instead of being opposing sides, then that would be, a really good thing to be coming into.
Yeah, totally. And having a mutual respect instead of there being like one way that is more superior than the other, because there's so many different women, there's so many different journeys that unfold for them in their pregnancy and what's important to them and what they want. Like we can utilize both instead of it just sort of being like one way or the other. Because it doesn't benefit women either way if we're strongly one way or the other. Like there definitely are women around the world who are being affected by having a lack of access to the medical system. But then it works the other way where the medical system is such a strong influence and it's harming women ultimately.
Yeah, so there's this similar kind of, separation and fear in the herb space, and so you've got these two spaces, the birth space and the herb space, which have kind of had a bit of a similar journey in, people having, like in the Western world, having lost their roots a bit, and the science world kind of dominating and taking over. And so so I'm just wondering, it's quite a controversial topic to be in this interview, because not only we're talking about two controversial topics, two topics that are shrouded in a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion. But I'm happy to just go there with you because I think that it needs to be spoken about more, both of those things together. As you know, a couple of years ago, I brought a midwife, a herbalist midwife from New Zealand, Linz Carmichael. I brought her to Australia to run a herbal birth workshop for birth workers. And, it was amazing the amount of fear and resistance I came up against within the birthing community, because they're not, Australia, like in the birth worker community, they're not taught how to work with herbs in birth through their education, and there's not necessarily the resources around unless we're blessed enough to have someone to learn from directly, which most people don't, from what I found, at least in Australia. So I would love to hear, for all of those out there that don't have inspiration to draw from and don't have information sources around this, I would love to hear how you incorporate herbs into your practice for pregnancy and birth and postpartum as well.
Yeah, so for me, for my journey of being comfortable to work with plants and herbs, it's something I've always had a relationship with. I think even as a child, I was like very connected with nature and plants. So it's something that I've utilized for my own health and healing, and have had better results with than avenues of what, like that, the medical system that I've needed to go down for particular things. So I had that self-confidence of knowing like this stuff like really works. And I've had really intentional training and a really intentional journey. So I am medically trained. I've trained in the university system as a midwife 10 years ago now. And alongside that training and alongside working within the system, I have also traveled the world and sought out elders and worked with traditional midwives to complement that, to ensure that I felt comfortable working in those ways. A lot of like self-directed learning as well, reading and courses around plants. But I think the biggest fear is like the fear of litigation. Like we're very much told that we need to practice in a certain way in Australia, particularly if you're working in the hospital system. So anything outside that, like you're kind of feared to pull in any alternative practices. Sometimes even it's really simple things like, working with the woman's body to help reposition the baby, or like working with alternative pain management. It's all kind of it's all a bit taboo and all a bit feared, and I think that does come because of that really strong influence of of doctors in within the hospital system. So for me, stepping outside of that system and having a lot more freedom and flexibility with how I work, having really strong relationship based care with the women that I work with, and having obviously having a certain demographic of women who choose to come to me and who choose to birth at home, and they're the ways that they live their life and they're the ways that they want to birth their babies as well. So yeah, there's definitely more flexibility for me in working in these ways. So I understand it's not applicable for everyone, but I think learning about them and learning from elders and people who are utilizing it in their practice is going to help give you the confidence to kind of like break down those fears and barriers a little bit more. And there's such a variety of ways you can work with plants in pregnancy and birth and postpartum, and it doesn't have to be in a way that's it can be in a more supportive way than an intervention way. And as your knowledge and your confidence grows, like I'm a lot more like prescriptive with working with certain plants and things instead of it just being like supportive. So I think that's working with plants in general. Like you have somewhere that you start, and as your knowledge and confidence builds, then that practice changes as well.
Beautiful. So what are some examples of herbs that you do work with for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum?
Yeah. So starting with pregnancy, even just teas, so things that are going to help restore the blood of the woman, help tone the uterus. So an easy one that most women have even heard from and sometimes get recommended during in the hospital system is red raspberry leaf. There's a misconception that it induces labor, which it does not. It helps to avoid postpartum hemorrhage though, and it helps to tone the uterus and get it ready for labor and be nice and strong and effective during the birth process. So they're probably like the gateway kind of like plants to work with. Some women have even been told in the hospital system to work with evening primrose oil to help soften the cervix. So I work with really intentional nutrition as well. So I have a passion and a connection with Ayurveda from living in India. So working with foods that are going to reduce the chances of pregnancy related complications occurring in the first place during pregnancy, because you're ensuring that like a big amount of nutrients is going to the baby, and therefore the woman's body isn't going to then try and compensate to make up for that lack of nutrients. Postpartum nutrition is very intentional because the digestion system is slow, and the body is like quite overloaded, that you can work with nutrition to rebuild the digestion. A lot of warming spices to bring a lot of warmth and heat to the body, which helps to in postpartum healing and recovery, and also supportive of milk supply. So there's lots of different ways that I work. I work with steaming and sitz baths, ceremonial plant baths, even sort of like working with plants for myself. So working with my own nervous system is something that I'm really passionate about, particularly when you're holding such a big space like birth, and you need to be the kind of like energetic sounding like rock in that space. Like your nervous system has to be really calm, so then you can be really tapped into your intuition if anything arises, but also because the family is kind of like looking to you as that space of calm as well. So yeah, there's plants that I work with myself. So during a birth, recently I had some motherwort tincture just to ensure that I was nice and calm and centered, like entering the space. And then during the birth itself, I made cacao for myself. But then the woman also commented afterwards that just the smell of it also helped her sort of like connect deeper, and she felt her cervix open. So yeah, there's really powerful ways that you can work with plants without it being something that's too intimidating, if that's not really a realm that you're yet comfortable in.
Yeah, that's such an important piece, isn't it? There's so much focus on caring for the mum and the baby, but then, actually taking care of the birth workers with herbs and food and, other supportive measures is such an important piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just that medical viewpoint of like seeing the baby as separate to the mother. So when you work with plants and when you work with nutrition, what you're doing is you're focusing on the well-being of the mother, because you know that directly affects the baby. So even when you're administering homeopathics, like if you're treating the baby, you're treating the mother. So she is the one who is taking the homeopathics, because then it therefore supports the baby. The same as if you're working with the woman's nervous system, it has direct impacts on the baby. So babies that are unsettled and colicky and just like haven't integrated their birth well, maybe they had a traumatic birth and physical symptoms are arising. If you treat the mother, then that's going to support the baby. The same as during pregnancy. Like, I like to describe the baby as like the seed in the soil of the woman, and the medical viewpoint is like, if the seed is not developing, if the small plant's not developing well, you take it out of its environment and then like either support it to grow or birth it early, and all these sort of like medical ways of medical approaches, instead of thinking about how we can tend to the well-being of the mother, because that's going to have direct implications on the growth and well-being and the health of the baby during pregnancy.
Yeah, and that extends into breastfeeding years too, right? Like if you want to administer herbs, supportive herbs to babies, you do that through the mother to come through the breast milk as well. So food and herbs and things like that as well. Yeah, because they're still kind of one. They are one being.
Absolutely.
In so many ways. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. So, yeah, that's such a big piece with the, everything you're saying with the ways to bring in the herbs. And something that you mentioned was like birth trauma as well. And it's something that I think is still not being talked about enough. There's a lot more, this huge surge in postpartum care that's happening at the moment, which is really exciting, that is being honoured, because for so many women, they come into this transitional point of becoming a mother and they're not necessarily prepared for it. And then it can be a really harsh experience entering into motherhood with all of the changes that are happening in their body and all of the life changes and everything that happens. That's a hard enough transition, can be a hard enough transition as it is, let alone if there has been a trauma that's occurred during the birth, or a really difficult birth and had a difficult transition. So I'm just wondering what practices you have, herbs, food or otherwise, that are supportive for women for post-birth trauma.
Yeah, I feel like birth in itself is such a huge event that needs integration, and needs integration not alone. It needs integration with like support of community and support of, your wise elders and your family around you. And women are kind of going through these huge birth experiences where we don't even really talk about birth, or we're never really exposed to birth or that early mothering period in our society in general. So they already like at such a shock of going into motherhood because they haven't had so much exposure to it, and then to have a traumatic birth on top of that. So things are changing as well. Like there has been a really big inquiry over the last year that is being like investigated on a really deep level, like through the court systems and things like this, around birth trauma. So I feel like the conversation is starting, but the birth trauma rates in Australia, they say 1 in 3 women report their births as being traumatic, and I think especially during COVID it was actually probably higher. And a lot of them are just it's traumatic births are so normal now. It's like just seems like a normal part of the birth process, that the rates, that if we actually break it down and women knew what they were possibly missing out on and what birth could be, like the rates might be even higher, unfortunately. So women have a lot of physical injury from birth when birth is more medicalized. So they have more healing in their bodies to do, whether they've had an episiotomy, which is a cut to the perineum, or an instrumental birth that really increases the trauma to the pelvis and the pelvic tissues and the vagina, and swelling and bruising and stitches, and a cesarean as well, which cuts through 7 layers of the abdomen. These are really huge physical things for the body. So to be healing from that, processing your birth, particularly if it was traumatic, the shock of early motherhood, and doing that alone, like we're just like leaving women to fail pretty much, like in our society. So from my teachers I've been taught from traditional midwives in Mexico and Guatemala, they say like postpartum depression is not normal in their societies. I think a big one is because the women aren't left alone. They have their families and communities come and tend to them. And that first postpartum period is really protected. So you may have heard of like the first 40 days after birth. It's very common in a lot of Asian countries, and that conversation is really rising again. Like in Ayurveda, they say the first 40 years after birth is a
40 days.
40 sorry the first 40 days after birth is an investment into the next 40 years of your life. So it's not just about that early period. We're seeing traditional cultures recognize the investment into the recovery post-birth is an investment into the health and well-being of the woman, which is the health and well-being of a community, because it ripples out through her family, it ripples out through communities. So the support that I offer is a combination of addressing the physical healing, so with really intentional nutrition, with plants and teas that calm the nervous system, with sitz baths and yoni steaming, so or pelvic steaming, if that's not a word you're familiar with, to help heal the vagina and any trauma that occurred during the birth. And I also work with massage to help realign all the organs of the body. So when a woman is pregnant, the baby and the space that it occupies literally pushes all the organs up. So when she has birthed, there's a lot of space in the abdomen. So you kind of want to support the woman to get out the additional air and fluid and help reposition the organs through massage. And I use like herbal oils as well, because when the organs are not in the right place, they're not going to function properly. And that's a long-term thing, not just in those kind of early days as well. I've been taught to work with something called a temescal, which is a traditional steam lodge. So that is through my teachers in Guatemala, the Mayan midwives. They perform a massage with a plant bath within the temescal, which is like this, really small, dark space that you're crawling back into, that kind of feels like being back in the womb itself. And the heat and the steam, it accesses the stories that are held on a cellular level and helps to sort of release those as well. It often puts women back into like a birth space, that kind of like lucid space, big glassy eyes and vocalizations working through the heat. And with the massage, the body's really responsive in the heat, and it gives her an opportunity to sort of process her birth experience. And in Mexico, you may have heard of a ceremony called closing of the bones, and we see it in the West as something that is done just at that 6-week period post-birth, and we're closing that chapter off. But actually in Mexico, traditionally it's done like every few days for the woman. So that postpartum care and support is very important, and a lot of energy and effort goes into it.
Yeah, it's such an important piece, and I'm really glad that you're talking about that, the importance of that 40 days and the importance of that like recuperation afterwards, because as you know, I birthed at home on the earth in a teepee, and it was all, it was all really beautiful. But afterwards, I had a doula that was meant to be doing a Maori version of the closing the bones. So I was meant to be spending that whole baby moon, which for me, from what I'd heard at that point, was a 30-day, or a full moon cycle, 28 days, 29-day cycle that you stay at home and you don't leave home. And so I did that. I didn't leave home for a whole moon cycle after birth, but I had the doula that was meant to be coming and wrapping me and kind of helping things to settle back into place properly, like in front of the fire most days. And she never came and she never did that. And I felt like completely blown wide open and without the actual physical support that I needed, because like you addressed earlier, like birth trauma isn't just like an energetic or emotional trauma that can happen in the space, but also like the physical trauma on the body. And especially in with our modern Western diet and what that's doing to our jaws and our hips, and a lot of us, including myself, very slim hipped, not well equipped to birth. And so the whole birthing process is just kind of like something that's not coming naturally physically and required so much more feeling like being ripped wide open, instead of, a lot of the Indigenous cultures that I've seen, birth is a very smooth
short and smooth experience overall. So I feel like I wasn't very prepared for that in my body, but also I wasn't really supported in the way that I needed from my birth team afterwards either. And I think that is something that needs more talking about, of like, how to, how to support mothers afterwards. And so it's really beautiful that you're bringing in these traditional practices, what you're learning in Guatemala, around the world, and you're bringing that into the space. And like, you work with the rebozo and you work with the temazcal and everything. And also on that, like with the temazcal, just for the listeners that don't know what that is, sometimes I call it like a sacred sauna. So it's like a sauna on the earth, like it's a steam. You're having hot rocks that have come from a fire and water poured over them, and you're being steamed in a really beautiful, sacred, deep way. And it's a practice that I've been working with for 13 years or something now. But I've never been able to see it in the birth space, and I think that's really beautiful. Like, I've met people from Mexico that they birth in the temazcal, and it makes so much sense because that heat and that moisture, and you're open, and it's you're on the earth, and it all just makes so much more sense, rather than the birth that I'd observed before I had a child. The only birth I'd ever seen was stirrups in the hospital. So screaming birth was quite a traumatic event, and that was normalized, like you said. So it's really interesting as time goes on, seeing these different examples of how things could be. But then also seeing examples that if they don't turn out that way, because we don't always get the ideal perfect birth that we want, or we don't have those resources available, then knowing, having the resources at least afterwards to help to support the mother and the baby and the family, and the midwives as well, the birth attendants, to be able to recover from that and heal from that. So it's really beautiful what you're bringing to the space in that way.
Yeah, so with my teachers in Guatemala as well, they utilize the temescal and massage and working with plants prior to birth as a birth preparation as well. So, as you explained, it's like we live very different lifestyles now. So structurally, there are a lot of, more challenges that we need to kind of address that can be not so supportive of us birthing. There are definitely things that you can do, a lot of body work and structural work. And I do something called internal pelvic release work, which is literally about making more space for the baby. But we are also very cognitive in our preparations for birth now as well. And we have a story of fear around birth, because that's how most people are birthing. So going into birth, we are a bit more like in our heads, and birth is a full body experience. If anything, we just need to be able to like get out of our minds and into our bodies, and it's just not how we're living our lives anymore. So when you preparing for birth, like, you can utilize these ceremonies in that preparation as well, because you're clearing yourself, like, emotionally and spiritually as well, in order to have the openness that the birth requires, and move out of the way the things in your life that are possibly obstructing that. Because it's a conversation that's like really starting up again, which is really great. But Indigenous peoples and traditional like healers have always understood the spiritual and emotional connection to the body and how that manifests physically. So when there are physical things that are presenting, and that might be in a way that is causing complication for the pregnancy, or can possibly impede the birth, if you actually come back and address it in a very holistic way, where you're working on the spiritual, emotional, and physical body, then that is therefore going to prepare you for birth. And I'm seeing at the moment in bringing these practices back to Australia, that definitely postpartum is where it's easier to kind of start, because people are a bit more hesitant during pregnancy to do these things, because of what we're told of like what we can and can't do during pregnancy. It's so restrictive. And the vast majority of women in Australia are still birthing in hospitals. And I was seeing a really stark difference when I'm called to a woman who's birthed in a hospital post-birth compared to a woman who has birthed at home. We're doing just really beautiful supportive practices and an integration of the birth for someone who's birthed at home and had a really positive birth experience. But I feel like when I'm arriving at the door of a woman who's birthed in hospital, it's often because I'm there to pick up the the pieces and try and put her back together. In a very physical, spiritual, and emotional sense, it's a very there's just a stark difference. So because vast majority of women are still birthing through the hospital system, postpartum just sometimes becomes this time where they recognize why birth matters and how it can impact them afterwards, and which they weren't necessarily aware of going into it. So I feel like I'm kind of like starting at the end and working backwards, but I'm definitely envisioning a space where this is like normal care during pregnancy that then can avoid those things happening in the first place.
Yeah, it's really beautiful what you're talking about bringing in and acknowledging the sacred side of things and the spiritual side of things, because that's the key that's kind of missing from the hospital system, isn't it? Like you don't see, spiritual practice or like really true emotional awareness in that space and any kind of, sense of spirit. So it's really beautiful. I was blessed enough during my pregnancy to be exposed to a lot of beautiful books that are out there. That is something that, spiritual midwifery was like my Bible during pregnancy, and, just down to earth birth book. And there's a lot of beautiful books out there that can support mothers and families, to be able to have a deeper, more sacred experience. But not everyone has access to those materials, and not everyone is like open to that. And it's unfortunate that then it takes until people are broken to then be picking up the pieces. And I see that happen a lot in the herbal realm too. Like a lot of people coming to me once they've already been spat out the other side of the hospital system and they're already damaged from unnecessary surgery and pharmaceuticals and all of that. And they're at the end of their tether being like, oh, like help fix this mess that's been created. And not to say that the hospital system or pharmaceutical world is all damaging, but it's just something that I see time and time again. So I think in that, like, prevention is such an information, like people being informed and educated and having preventional things is like the key to avoid all of this, not all of this, but to avoid a lot of things that could be avoided. So, and I know that that's something that you're quite passionate about, is preventative care and like whole body care. So I wonder if you could share just a bit about, to our listeners, like a bit of things to consider about preventative care and holistic care for the mother and the baby during pregnancy, so that they can expect a best outcome possible from birth and postpartum.
Yeah, I think it needs to start preconception. Your nutrition preconception and your health preconception is going to impact the health of your pregnancy and therefore the health of your child. So we don't really talk about it enough, that actually, like, your pregnancy and the birth weight of your child, if you had any pregnancy related complications, impacts your child's health for life. So you need to bring it back to investing in your own health is actually investing in the health of your children and your grandchildren. So it's a pretty big responsibility. And I think when that dropped for me, like, I just changed my whole life, and I was very intentional about what I eat, what I put in my body from or what I put on my body, even what I consume in every single way, even from like music or media or anything I put in my body. I'm recognizing that I am like this vessel that is going to like nurture and hold and birth life. So investing in that. So investing in really good quality foods, starting preconception, because, if you do have this period of time in your first trimester specifically where you are quite nauseous and vomiting a lot, and nutrition is just not really something that you can really focus on, because sometimes it's just a bit of survival mode. But also recognizing that you can work with plants to support that as well. But the formation of the placenta in the early weeks postpartum can be an indication to any pregnancy related complications arising later in the pregnancy that then we try and manage, instead of being wanting to like avoid them in the first place. So if you focus on your nutrition prior to conception, this is also for men as well, and the quality of their sperm and their sperm health, because that is also impacting the health of the placenta and the baby.
There's an incredibly amazing book about all of that called Brighton Baby,
Yes,
which I'll put in the show notes as well, like all of the books and resources we've been talking about I'll put down in the show notes for everyone that's listening. But yeah, Brighton Babies are really one of the good resources that I know about, at least about preconception and how to naturally, organically support the mother and father to be the houses for the best possible babies, and to not have it taken at an expense to them, because, you know, they used to have that saying, I think you said the other night, the saying still exists, but a tooth per baby, you know, so that like whatever calcium the baby needs will take from the mother, and if the mother doesn't have that through her diet, then it will take it from the bones, will take it from the teeth. So yeah, we've got to like be really make sure before we even have a child that our bodies are at a really good point, so that then it's not using expenditure that we don't have, using resources that we don't actually have to give.
yeah, because the baby in the placenta will like dictate what it needs from the mother. So we look at things like high blood pressure and high blood sugar levels in a really isolated way. We see it as a malfunction of the body, when really it's not. It's the baby and the placenta have indicated that they are not getting enough nutrients, so therefore they're increasing the blood pressure to get more nutrients from the mother, or increasing the blood sugar levels in order to get more nutrients from the mother, because ultimately like the growth of the baby is what takes precedence over everything. So the health of the woman will deteriorate. So if you're focused on your health, then you're less likely to come across situations like that that are mitigating like what the baby is having to deal with. Babies that aren't growing well, babies that are, if you're commonly having preterm labors and preterm babies, it's all an indication of the function of the body, and there are ways that we can work with it. So with nutrition, with working on your nervous system, with addressing any imbalances, if you have any sort of like systemic infections or imbalance, that's optimizing your health and well-being will prevent those things happening in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, and then also the diet throughout the pregnancy. Like I see so many pregnant mothers drinking coffee, which has been shown time and time again through science studies that coffee is really detrimental to the fetus, to the development of the brain and the development of the heart, especially at certain points in the growth. If there's coffee present, can be really, really detrimental to the health of the baby. But it's really hard to tell people that, because you don't want to make people feel bad about their choices. But at the same time, I think being educated around these things should be more put out in the open and normalized, because I certainly wasn't taught that when I was going through the hospital midwifery pre-assessment period during my pregnancy. I wasn't informed about diet and the importance of, and even though I had really good midwives at a really great hospital and all of that were assessing me, but there wasn't really education around that. I had to seek that out myself. So
well, like the mainstream narrative around like what we should be eating during pregnancy, for one, midwives don't really get taught a lot in university, nor do doctors. Like we know, like when someone's presenting with an issue, like how often really are we breaking down what they're eating? And our societal views of what good eating is and what healthy foods are is definitely not what I believe they are. And I think it's a lot of self-responsibility. Like you need to be reclaiming that as well, because you're not necessarily going to be told it through that system. For me, I have a really big emphasis on nutrition with my education and with the women that I work with, because that's something I'm really passionate about for myself in my own life. But I recognize when it's not, there's so many unhealthy doctors and midwives or healthcare professionals. So if that's not a priority for their own life, they're not going to therefore then be educating, or maybe even have the right information to be sharing with someone. So when a woman has gestational diabetes in the hospital system, what the women are told to eat is just mind-blowing. It's all like low-fat yogurt, oats, like just absolutely nutritional void food that is not going to be supportive of her blood sugar levels. So it's not going to be supportive for the growth of the baby. So even the information women are getting given is not supportive. We're told not to eat like raw fish and oysters and soft cheeses and things. But if you actually look at traditional diets around the world, like some of the most nutrient dense things that are like important for pregnant women to eat are things like liver and organ meats and like fresh fatty fish, which is essential for the growth of the brain of the baby. So we've just got it totally backwards when it comes to nutrition in the West, specifically around pregnancy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there needs a big shake-up. So, I mean, what would you recommend for someone with gestational diabetes, if not having low-fat yogurt and oats and things? Like, what are the best things to be having during that time?
High protein. Yeah. Protein is like one of the biggest things you want to focus on, like high protein, high good quality fat diets. And you pretty much can't go wrong if you focus on those two things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And cutting out processed sugars.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, processed
anyway.
sugars, anything. I'm pretty brutal when it comes to my sharing about the importance of what you eat. I'm pretty much say, if you eat shit foods, you're going to feel shit. And you really want to focus on like organic, local, nothing packaged, processed, or wait, I actually have a saying around this. Yeah, I have a saying, it's nothing pre-made, packaged, or processed. So pretty much you want to be going back to those whole foods. There's some really great resources. Nourishing Traditions is an incredible book. There's one specifically around like children as well, and pregnancy. And
I've got all of them.
yeah, they're amazing. And Lily Nichols as well is a really easy to access resource. She specifically talks about real food for gestational diabetes and real food for pregnancy are her books. She's got heaps of free resources. And again, she's really focused on whole foods, nose to tail eating, and high protein.
Great. All this will be in the show notes, people. Don't be frantically scrabbling for your pen and paper right now. Yeah, beautiful. Wow, there is just so much amazing information out there if you know where to look and who to trust, with it.
Yeah, but it can also seem really overwhelming as well. Like, I think our first go-to is still Google, and it's gonna funnel vision like in what it wants us to access. I really do feel investing in a holistic guide during your pregnancy, and that may be a midwife, or that may be a naturopath or a nutritionist, or whatever you resonate with, a herbalist, who knows you, then you're going to get more specific sort of information if this is something that you don't have knowledge around yourself.
Do you offer consultations for mothers to be able to, like, online or something, if there's anyone out there that would like a kind of holistic overall, guidance from a midwife just around diet and, all of this stuff that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I offer online consultations, whether you're trying to conceive and you want to prepare, whether that's during pregnancy just for general support, or if you have something more specific that you're not necessarily aligning with what the hospital system is telling you, and you want more information and more options. And for birth preparation, but postpartum healing as well. So women who have had maybe like a challenging birth, an instrumental birth, or a cesarean, then I can give you individualized support and guidance on how to heal your body. Because that's a big one. We're told, oh yeah, by 6 weeks you should all be healed. But there's no conversations around how scar tissue, whether it's in the perineum or from a cesarean, can actually impact your fertility. It can impact your sex life. It can impact your continence. It can impact your births after you've had a birth like that. So there's no discussion around that at all. And that's something that I teach a lot on, because it needs to be way more widely known to be able to support women in their healing, not just in those early days, but actually in that preparation for avoiding any long-term issues coming up, but also like in preparing for another pregnancy and birth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. And so you don't just teach and help mothers, you also work directly with midwives and other birth workers as well, don't you? I hear you doing lots of classes from our house, and try not to eavesdrop too much. But yeah, it sounds like you have a lot to offer to other birth workers, like around Australia and internationally as well. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I recognize that I've had this like parallel learning experience where over the last decade I've traveled the world, learned from a lot of traditional cultures. My knowledge of plants isn't working with pregnancy isn't just normal, even if it feels normal for me. So I do teach anyone who works with pregnancy or birth. So it's a lot of doulas, midwives, private midwives, a lot of students, but even like yoga teachers and Ayurvedic practitioners and some like women themselves out of interest have just come. A lot of this stuff that I share, I do talk about it in the context of pregnancy and postpartum, but really it's applicable to women with our cycles as well. We are having this like cyclical journey, each month. I hate to say each month because that normally, says that it should be within a month. But, our bodies are constantly changing. We're bleeding. We are going through those hormonal changes. That is preparation for pregnancy, birth, and menopause. So when we're already utilizing the supports of plants, forming relationships with plants, doing things like sitz baths and steaming, in our lives to support our cycles, then we already have a relationship with those things, and they're going to be even more supportive in that pregnancy and postpartum journey for us as well, as a preventative, but also in our healing.
Beautiful. So what kind of educational support services do you offer to other birth workers around Australia and internationally?
So I offer online mentoring as a one-on-one support. I have previously done mentoring journeys, and that may be something that comes up in the future, but I've found working one-on-one is really supportive at the moment, because I'm tapping in directly with where that person is on their journey and how they work, and how the advice I provide is a bit more individualized to them and their ways of working. I'm asked to teach of a part of other schools as well. So I've recently been doing a 6-month journey with a school called Soma Shakti, and I also teach there on their in-person retreats as well, which are just absolutely incredible birth worker and postpartum doula trainings.
Is that in Australia?
That's in Australia, yeah. The online component is open for anyone, and we have women from Latin America and Europe and Australia sort of joining in. And the last retreat that we held, we did have women from other countries as well come for the retreat in the in-person training. And I travel Australia, mostly the East Coast, teaching postpartum work and supportive practices, and specifically at the moment I'm really focused on working with a rebozo and belly binding, and really intentional ways of working with those two tools. And I also co-facilitate a retreat in Guatemala, so I support the midwives there, who are the ones who teach, who share on mind abdominal massage, a really deep, intense modality of massage that is actually used for everyone, men, women, and children, but it's particularly supportive for preconception and postpartum. And there is where I've really deepened my knowledge of plants. So we work a lot and learn a lot more about working with plants there, and working in the Temescal. We do yoni steams, plant baths, balm making, like intentional herbal balms for working with the womb. So that's a really incredible intensive journey. It's more like a ceremony that goes for 7 days, that kind of spirals deeper and deeper, and it's open to anyone. So you can, it's a learning through experiencing. So you're also going through this deep personal healing journey whilst connecting with the modalities, so then you understand how they work, how they feel, what it's like to receive, and the kind of container that you need in order to facilitate and hold that, and really truly experiencing it, held by a group of local Guatemalan and Mayan midwives, hearing their stories. It's an extremely inspiring retreat to come on. So, and very intentional food as well, organic food to nourish your bodies and alongside this process as well. So that's coming up in February next year, in 2025.
And that's open, like any birth workers can book in for that still?
Yeah. It's open to everyone. So when I initially did the training myself, there was only a handful of birth workers there, and mostly just women who worked in different capacities, possibly in body work, or who actually just wanted this supportive practice for themselves. because we learn how to perform it on ourselves. The practices of like steaming and temescal and plant baths you can do for yourself as well, but it's beautiful to be held in that. And yeah, so it's a really, really held container. The midwives are, they're spiritual guides. They're like unwavering in holding us, going to the depths that we need to go in order to heal. But yeah, you can also then utilize these modalities for your own practice, and it's completely transformed the way that I work. Yeah, working in a way of like deep connection and deep intention, I've found is had incredibly like powerful impacts in regards to the effectiveness of the work that I'm doing. You know, I'm not just doing a massage. I'm like really connected to spirit and allowing that spirit to like work through me instead of it being this like cognitive thing that I'm doing physically. I really learned ways on how to tap into working on the energetic and spiritual levels as well. And for birth, that's just been profound.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, wow. The Mayan midwives' wisdom is like absolutely incredible. Many years ago, I attended a 4-day retreat, learning the Arvigo technique, like a Mayan abdominal care, and yeah, it totally was so healing. And then I got pregnant very soon after that with my daughter, and yeah, so I got a little bit of insight there, and then I've been getting a bit of insight through what you've been sharing with me. But yeah, it's pretty inspirational. So I definitely recommend if anyone can get over there and do that. So that's one space that people like listeners could book into or be involved with. But like, you know, some of the other offerings that you've got currently going and upcoming, like where can people find out more about them or book in for them or get involved?
Yeah, so on my website, I have an event calendar. So my website that we will link below, there's a few different tabs, and there's a tab that says for birth workers, and that has an event calendar. So everything that I'm doing, whether it's online, in collaboration with other people, workshops or retreats are all listed there, or you can sign up to my mailing list as well, because most of them or all of them have sold out. So I open up the capacity to book through my mailing system first and then put it online on my social media. So I'm pretty active on Instagram, and I share a lot about the work that I do and the ways that I work with plants and nutrition, and working with the midwives as well, and little glimpses of our retreat last year, so you can get an idea of, you know, the sorts of things that we do. Yeah, it's my really like creative outlet and place to share.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for everything that you've been sharing. I think we're getting pretty close to wrapping up. I suppose I just want to open it up if there's anything you feel like we've missed, or if there's anything in particular you'd like to share with our listeners that might help them on their birthing and living journeys.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to come back to yourself during this journey and recognize what is important for you, and try not to get swept up in the narrative of society telling you how birth should be, or that you need to do things in your pregnancy or birth or postpartum a certain way, because we're really actively breaking down that narrative now. We're recognizing how restrictive it is and how actually damaging it is for women and babies and families. So continue to come back to your own intuition and call in the supports that are going to support you on the journey that you want, because pregnancy and how you birth your baby is one of the most important things you're ever going to do. So it's not something that you want to do someone else's way. It really sets up you and your family for the life that you want to live. It has long-term implications, so it's something that's worth investing in.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me here today on the Elder Tree podcast, Sarah. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Twiggy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Herbal Education segment of the Elder Tree podcast. Stay tuned every new moon as I interview more wise and inspiring herbal educators and herbal lore keepers from around Australia. If you would like to go deeper with the podcast journey, you can become a member of the Elder Tree Trove on Patreon. Contribute as little as $2 per week to access free content from our interviewees, and also access discount codes and opportunities which are exclusive to our members. You can find us on Patreon by going to www.patreon.com/theeldertree. Other ways that you can assist us in getting our offerings out there to more people in Australia is by subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and on the Spotify app. Also, liking, commenting on and sharing our social media posts actually has a really positive impact and helps us to reach further with the message from all of the amazing herbal lore keepers that we interview on this podcast. Thank you so much for your support and have a most wonderful day.